You're listening to Toronto's #1 real estate podcast, powered by Watson Estates. The most successful local real estate investing starts right here, right now. Here's your host, broker, investor, and social media influencer, Bradley Watson.
Good morning, investors. Bradley here from Watson Estates. I hope you guys had a fabulous week. And here we are on the weekend, because realtors never sleep, August 8th, 2020. It is a Saturday, talking about our favorite subject, Toronto real estate. We are the largest and fastest growing podcast for that subject on iTunes, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. And we're here to talk about some great stuff today. I hope you're ready. We're going to start off talking about why I believe that July 2020 is the last peak month for prices. Is the peak behind us? We're going to talk about some stats as we follow up from the last podcast I did, going through some of the TREB stats. We're going to kind of go through some of that again, some of the highlights from a different perspective. But I missed pretty much the most important point of that podcast, and I kicked myself as soon as I finished filming. I'm like, I got to circle back. So I'm excited to share with you why I believe July is the last peak month for prices. And then we're going to get into this moratorium on evictions being lifted, and what are the rights of tenants? What are your rights as tenants, or what are your tenants' rights, depending on who you are? And we want to talk a little bit about this whole discussion on whether you can be quickly evicted and this Bill 184. I think we just need to bring it back down to basics and talk about what rights exist for the tenant. I think it's going to really simplify things for us today. And then, will mortgage rates stay low this low, really, for years? Or is this just kind of a blip? Is this an opportunity for you to jump in, get yourself a nice fixed rate mortgage, and then you can expect them to come up again, whether that has to do with interest rates or the rates being provided as advertised from your bank? We're going to talk a little bit how all of those things are connected. So you're not going to want to leave. And before we get into all that topic, I watched the Leaf game last night. Very exciting game. We are moving on to game 5, and I'm seeing in the news, I was watching it from home, but you can actually go to Ontario Place now, according to CP24. As of yesterday, they played their first game. You can go to a little drive-in. So if you're looking for a little hobby, you want to watch sports, maybe try Ontario Place. It's something to do. Not me. I was watching hockey before it was cool. Swimming. It was called swimming. That's actually why hockey rinks are rounded, if some of you don't know, because if it had 90 degrees, the ice would melt. That's a Fahrenheit joke for my American fans. We're going to start getting into what really counts today, which is Toronto real estate. Less chance of a choke this season than... Anyways, moving on. Toronto's real estate market smashes July records. This comes from Yahoo Finance. I really like this article because it takes a finance approach to real estate, which, funny enough, is closer to how I think. I don't tend to think from the perspective of stats. I tend to think from the perspective of finance, and maybe you've seen that in the way that I dialogue on some of these topics, but you'll see what I mean in just a minute. So just to reiterate some of the big stats, to regurgitate some of the big stats, we're chewing the cud here, us little ice cows. The Greater Toronto Area housing market seems almost immune to the crippling economic effects of COVID right now. There was 11,081 homes sold, according to TREB, which was a 29.5% increase compared to the same month last year. Getting you guys caught up. We are up, guys. We're not down 67%. We are up almost 30%. Sales activity was extremely strong for the first full month of summer. Normally, we would see sales dip in July relative to June as more households take vacations, especially with children out of school. That was from the TREB president. But you didn't need to wait until now to hear that, because we talked about that yesterday. Typically, July comes down from June, and then in August and September, it goes up again slightly before school starts. And then you kind of go from there, and it comes back into the winter and things come back down. So it was very shocking to see stats in July outperforming or even keeping close to June. That was impressive, because that tells us we're still in the heat of this quote unquote summer or spring market. So, but I love where this article goes with this finance perspective. So Daniel Falk, I don't know how you say that. What a terrible... Okay, I can't criticize the guy's name, because he even named his brokerage Falk Family Real Estate. Okay, this is how you spell it before I get sued or in trouble. Foch. Okay, So Fock Family Real Estate says the market isn't as hot as some people want to claim it is. He says crashing stock. I love how they use his last name. This is one of those scenarios where I think you're better to quote him as a first name. This should be Daniel told Yahoo Finance. But he says crashing stock markets where the pandemic first began led to something of a flight to quality into real estate. I love this perspective. I love it. Okay, so people are, here's the real estate way of thinking, okay? Real estate way of thinking is the market's doing really good. All of a sudden, everyone loses their jobs and employment falls and everyone sells or forced selling need to dump their properties. That's real estate. And that's what people expected. And that's why I think most of the news and even most of the stuff I researched and people I listened to were saying prices are going to come tumbling down right out of the gate. And they did have an impulse reaction, but I think that was mostly psychological. What people failed to acknowledge is that in times of uncertainty, real estate, among other assets, can actually be stability. And especially when we have a time of mass inflation, which we're going to go into. We were kind of talking about deflation a little bit back. This idea, and the idea of deflation is that people will feel like their value of their money will be worth more down the road. And therefore, why would I spend the money now? And it creates a downward spiral of people not spending and then losing their jobs and da-da-da-da-da. So a small amount of inflation can be healthy, but with the amount of money printing that's going on right now in Canada and the United States, it puts asset classes like stocks, precious metals, and real estate as areas of safety because you don't want to just hold cash. And we've seen I know that prices we've seen some stability a little bit in the local currency. As oil has done well, it's kind of been tied to oil, but there's definitely been recent fluctuations. And so your stability for many Canadians, and not just Canadians, but people around the world, Canadian real estate is a place of confidence for a lot of people. And this is how he positions it. I think that we're also seeing an increase in foreign capital spending in the GTA on a similar principle, that Canadian real estate is a flight to quality in the global context. Because real estate is a much less liquid product with a long run sales cycle, it perpetuated the consumer sentiment of market growth and resilience we were seeing in early March. And that's why it's even been able to shine above stocks. And look at what stocks have done, guys. Look at what precious metals have done. This is the common theme that runs throughout, is during a time of extreme or risk of high inflation levels, to have a place that is able to have long-term stability and will increase as that inflation increases has created a lot of comfort for investors. And I love that perspective because it gives a whole new angle to why is real estate doing good when everyone is expecting it to do poorly. And you can say, well, maybe it's just real estate. Well, not necessarily, because I'm seeing articles, and this is obviously an extreme scenario, of Hong Kong. For example, Hong Kong's obviously going through a lot of challenges right now, but it doesn't mean there's no money in Hong Kong. There's lots of it. So what is happening in Hong Kong? Well, according to this article, came out of Financial Post, I believe this was yesterday, they said some Hong Kong foreclosed homes have been recently sold at steep discounts, adding to signs that the world's most expensive housing market could be headed for price declines both this year and next. Here's some of the stats they say. With the economy hit by anti-government protests and the coronavirus pandemic, foreclosures in the Asian financial hub jumped 54% in the first 7 months of the year. Okay, way more, like we don't see that here. We don't see that. They say both speculative investors and ordinary people are walking away from their mortgages. Financing companies and auctioneers told Reuters. Some warn foreclosures could surge next year to their highest level since the global financial crisis. They talk about, though, from a stats perspective, commercial properties, they've dropped 30%, but residential are actually still up 1.8%. Surprisingly, they're doing pretty good from a price perspective. But they note that they've seen huge discounts from large investors. We're talking properties of 30 million and 20 million, both selling at discounts of 25% and 12%. This could be leading indicators of foreclosures and lack of confidence. So if you, as an investor on the global scale, were considering, should I invest in Hong Kong or Toronto? Definitely not Hong Kong, right? Not Hong Kong. And so to say Toronto competes at the global scale is true. It's true. So that article that we were reading earlier continues. I think the big six banks, Bank of Canada and the federal government, also instilled confidence in the consumers that they're basically willing to prop up housing by any means necessary. A lot of people disagree with this. And I don't like the government sticking their nose in too many things. I was early on supportive, and I still think I'm generally supportive of the government. If you're going to tell people to sit at home and to not work, you're going to need to provide, where's the money? Show me the money! Talk about investments. And here we go again. Fox says, while there's, Fox, if I say like Fox says. When you say says, it actually can change the whole word. Wow. There's been movements into the suburbs, but it's not systematic yet, or systemic yet, as he says it. So I like this perspective because I agree. It's something I agree with. Now, the percentages, however you position them, this is what he says. I'd say it seems to be about 30% driven by seeking greater comfort, work from home. Okay. 30% driven by people conceding that they may not be on an airplane within 12 months and want to live in a vacation-esque locale. Okay. I think it's a combination of all these things, but if he wants to break it down. And 40%, it's financial stress or deformation of households. In other words, millennials moving back in with their parents. I don't think that is the case, but maybe. I don't think it's that high, but it's a combination of all these things. But is it systemic or not? I would agree. I don't think this is systemic. I think this is a trend. And I think, now that said, this will have long-lasting impacts and success of local nearby GTA markets. But I do think that to say people are running from Toronto and that will continue to run, and nobody's coming back, I don't think so. Fox says a lot of buyers are emotional instead of rational. Definitely. And when we look at the HPI, as we talked about yesterday, that number is up 10%, but when you compare it against the average price of 16.9, it tells us that we have higher end homes pushing the average price up. That's what that's all saying. So, and then with the kind of this idea of it not being rational and people running to these outskirt communities and not ignoring the economy and any of the downside risks and the illiquidity risks that we face in the fringes of the GTA, they're saying here's the areas with the biggest price increases. South Simcoe County, 14.12%, Orangeville, 13.91%, and Durham, 12.27%. So we have seen significant price growth. Now that said, if you invested in these markets a couple months ago, thumbs up to you. But does that mean if they're up that high that we should be jumping into those markets right now? I think you'd be a little silly to be doing that. That's me personally. So people are torn. We are torn down the middle. It's kind of like a feud. We got the Leafs and the Habs right here. We're torn on what comes next. What comes next? We have some very smart people who listen to this podcast, which keep me humble and they keep me smart. And so here's a couple perspectives, okay? This comes from Sharing Lungs. This one thought, what the stats report and what I see from my watch list tells me two very different things. Most houses on my watch list have been sitting on the market for a while, and some have reduced their asking by 10% or so. Seems when they have sold, it's between 90 to 100% of asking. Definitely feels like the market is shifting where supply is increasing and old stock sticks around. Some sellers seem out of touch with their initial asking prices. I agree with all of those things. Now, this is obviously market specific. It depends on where you are, but I am seeing this trend too. And if you are following the market, you might as well. But we have this other perspective. Sergey, thank you for your comment. Possibly the market is just picking up. There's fear of missing out setting in because we got to keep in mind, we got opening of Toronto. We got less and less COVID cases. Moreover, COVID turned into be like more of a bad flu, if that, which I think is a very American way of perspective. And like we're seeing the death rates obviously going down and it's all just setting in. And I think there's a lot of confidence and I see that too. So I see both sides. I hear you. I hear you guys. I hear the comments, but you guys need to know my perspective. And my perspective is that July 2020, I believe, was the last spring, quote unquote, spring month for 2020. And I think from here on out, you're going to see the deals get better. And here's why I say that, because I said that in my podcast yesterday, and I do apologize. I had this big old fat graphic, which is in my podcast again today, that I missed. In all of the craziness, I skipped over the one thing was the graphic. So we're going to review month over month, just very high level, the prices changes and the sales percentage changes, because I think this, to me, points a very clear picture. So to give a little bit of history, when we look back in 2019, July to August of 2019, so we want to know, what does it normally look like? Now, was last year normal? No, I don't think so. But I actually think the fact that we see it here, 2019 is actually, it's less than it would be in a typical year. So I think it still shows you what I'm trying to explain here, which is sales in July of 2019 to August was 4.9 year over year, or sorry, month over month change into July. But into August, it went down to 1.3%, meaning the number of sales they went up, but far slower between July and August than from June to July. And when we look at prices, they were pretty much flat. In fact, they went up 0.2%. Now, there was a natural climbing happening at the end of 2019, and we start to see that really big in December, which is why it's not a normal year. However, typical month, August tends to come down from July as far as increases. And as far as like seasonally, we see even prices generally in the winter will come down. That's a normal scenario, which again didn't happen as much in 2019. So let's fast forward, put us in the shoes of 2020. So here we are. We just came through a super flat hot month, June, right? June, 908,000, a month increase, month over month increase of 10%. Off the charts, guys, 10% average price increase in TREP. Number of sales up 84% month over month. Stellar increases, right? So, but then when we look in July, is it going up? Absolutely. It's going up though by less. This is why I believe we are reaching a top, or we are nearing a top of the spring, and as prices, and I think we got to be paying attention, as even if you're saying, you know what, prices might go up. And if that is the case, they're not going to go up by much, at least not for the next little while, next couple months. But more likely, I think prices will come down because seasons and because of all of these concerns that people have and the exuberance that we've experienced in the last few months. But here's the numbers for this month, July. We have seen a month over month increase in sales by 49.5%, which again is incredible. But that's compared to June, which was up 84%. So we are seeing a slowing down in the increase in the number of sales. We have caught up, and there's a little bit of a deflation in just the craziness. As well, prices, as mentioned, is up 5.5%. Really good, but next to a 10% increase we saw in June, is this going to be the spring moving forward? No, I believe that the number of sales, the increase, exceptional sales year over year is behind us. And I think that these two numbers, this coming down of sales and of price increases, not saying they're coming down, but that they're coming down in the speed that they're growing, tells me that June and July were the top, which is really going to mess with our numbers in 2021, if you think about it. But what is more interesting to me that I'm going to be watching for is going to be housing types and months of inventory. Now, I think I've beaten that like with a hockey stick here. So we're going to move on to our next topic, this idea of tenant rights. You tenants out there, we're going to make sure you know your rights. Read them their Miranda rights on the moratorium. I really don't like the word moratorium. Why don't we, like, it's a word I've never used, but I've used it so much recently. I can't be the only one. What are tenant rights with the moratorium on evictions lifted? Well, I saw a nice article came out of Guelph today, and it's coming from one of their legal clinics. It's called the Legal Clinic of Guelph in Wellington County. And they're urging tenants to seek legal advice and know their rights as concerns around evictions rise. I'm like, okay, read me my rights. Read me my rights. So here's what they say. We want people to feel empowered and not intimidated. Okay, well, that's good. That's noble of you. The provincial moratorium on enforcement of eviction orders lifted this week, which is when sheriffs began sending tenants notices about changing locks. I do agree there is a ton of confusion around this topic right now. There's nobody's really talking about it. News are they're just reporting it, but a report of people being evicted doesn't help the people from getting evicted. I mean, you didn't pay your rent, but okay, we have to sympathize with the tenants, because if they are feeling intimidated, that is not cool. Can we all just agree it's not cool if you're feeling intimidated to sign a document? But do you really blame these people to come off intimidating when they haven't been getting paid for months on end? Like, there's definitely a conflict that's happening here. So let's hear the rights. Tenants need to understand that with the recent changes to the Residential Tenancies Act, a landlord and a tenant can enter into a repayment arrangement without going to the board. These agreements can become orders. So that is the fact. That is the new ruling that Bill 184 brings. You and your landlord can sign a document that kicks you out without going to the board, and you're going to agree and sign on that. That's the ruling. Whether they know that that's the case or not is another issue. I believe tenants are knowledgeable. I believe they're connected, especially at a time like this, with people who can educate them on that. And maybe you know somebody who needs that education. Be that person for that person. So what we're saying is, if you're a tenant and you're approached by your landlord to sign an agreement, you should get some legal advice so you could talk about what the consequences are. That's your right. That is it. It's that simple, right? They say this: we want you to understand that if you want to enter a repayment arrangement, that's great. We want you to understand what the consequences are and what could happen if you breach, and what happens if you breach, get an eviction order. It'd be like saying you were allowed to use real estate agents when you were doing your leases before, but now you're allowed to just do leases yourself. You're allowed to go up, you can negotiate with your landlord, you can do a rental agreement, and we've got papers in place for that because apparently no one's smart enough to know. I mean, there was really no document before, so that's cool. That's also one of my largest videos, was explaining the Ontario standard lease agreement, because a lot of people were like, what is this? And so if that's the case and you don't feel comfortable filling out these forms or getting this agreement, which really you should be getting consultation at that point anyways, then lawyer up. It's that simple. Don't sign something. Don't just sign it. Now, is there a form of intimidation? Yes, and there's nothing legal about that. If someone intimidates you into a contract, that's not cool. There's further issues than that. But if you are approached with a document that says sign this and I'll let you stay here, which I think is the way that they're selling it, go see a lawyer. Like, people, you don't need to be smart enough to know that. Does that require a ton of brain power? Like, maybe it requires a lot of knowledge and industry insight to understand what the paper says, the document says that they're presenting to you. But it doesn't take a genius to know, I should probably talk with somebody about this before I sign. So don't feel pressure, guys. And they say, she said, those unhappy with the repayment agreement should wait. So option number 1, lawyer up and before you sign. Option number 2, don't sign. Is that difficult? If you want a hearing, you can ask the adjudicator for that longer period of payment. So you're going to end up delaying and kicking the can down the road by going up to the landlord-tenant board anyway. So if you really want to just delay this thing and delay, those avenues are still available. We're just trying to streamline the process because the LTB is so backlogged. So you're right, number 1, lawyer up before you sign. Duh. Right, number 2, don't sign a bad agreement. If you're not confident, don't sign. Number 2. And apparently that's not good enough. So poor John Tory is going to get pummeled by angry protesters. So we're going to move right along here. Before we get into our last topic, a couple of the highlights, the big news I'm seeing that I'm keeping my eyes on, keep one eye on the computer as I'm reading my podcast and the other eye on this. CTV News, Canada plotting $3.6 billion retaliation over Trump's tariffs. You've probably heard this. There was a 10% tariff that had been slapped. They've been kind of hemming and hawing about this. And on Thursday, it was made official by Trump. He announced this plan. Well, is Canada going to just roll over? No. Our fearless leader, Justin Trudeau, is going to slap more tariffs back on them. Here's what's interesting about this whole thing. I think tariffs is a load of, I'd say, cow manure, but the farming industry got pummeled. So I feel like I can't bully them. I don't know. It's a load of aluminum. Tariffs is a tax on your own people. This is important, guys. You think, so the whole reason behind tariffs, if I were, again, not an economist, but my perspective, my humble opinion, is tariffs is a way of saying, okay, our prices in this area are more expensive. For example, let's say cars, right? We make cars super cheap here, and then it costs us more expensive because of the damn unions, and it costs us all this money to make GM product. So we're going to, instead of becoming more competitive here or not producing it if we're not efficient at it anyways, we're going to put a tariff on imports on, say, Toyota. All that does is makes buying a Toyota more expensive. That is a tax on your own people. In this case, the United States is feeling like we have predatory pricing, which is not the case. If you actually listen to people who are familiar, they have the Aluminum Association of Canada President, CEO John Simmer. He says, we're not dumping aluminum, the term for selling under domestic prices. Rather, we're selling it at the current international price. So they're not dumping it, but Trump feels like we're dumping aluminum on them. So what's he going to do? He's going to charge a tariff so that his own people need to pay more to consume that good. So tariffs is silly. And it's very different than someone who you'd expect would be a free market capitalist. But now, neither here nor there, we are in, it seems as though we've just taken a few years back on our steps. It sounds very much like a couple years ago when we were having the whole NAFTA challenge. And what do I get out of this? What do I get out of this? I mean, regardless of what we slap tariffs back on them in equal proportion, which is the plan, This, in my opinion, is a symptom of a larger global problem. I think Canada's aluminum industry will be protected. I believe we'll be covered as we were in years past in other industries. But our relationship with the US will continue to distance. I think this is what we're going to see happen. And as this happens, hopefully we become more independent. Finally, we need to keep the border closed, in my opinion, big reason being COVID, and become self-sufficient. Just like basketball players right now, right? They're not traveling. Travel joke, get it? They're not allowed to travel. And hopefully the states aren't either. And hopefully we can start to become more independent on our own. And our relationship can still be civil. But I think we need to stop being dependent on the sleepy giant next door. I love that analogy where it's like you're sleeping with the giant. When the giant rolls over, you really feel it. And we need to become more independent. Get your own bed. Lie in your own bed. Make it out of aluminum. Because the states aren't buying it. Buy local. And then the other news that's happening right now on a national perspective is CERB. CERB is winding down, and what is happening, we're replacing it with EI. And the government estimates 4 million people will be moved onto EI as we wind down next month. They're saying the amounts right now are between 600 to 1,000 a month if we get pushed onto the EI, which obviously is less than the 2,000 that we've become comfortable with. And the funny thing is the debate right now is it enough? Is 500 enough money? And they say this in this article, the government should consider raising EI's wage replacement rate, currently set at 55% to around a 75% mark offered by the federal wage subsidy program employers have been offered in the pandemic. He added that a floor on benefits similar to the weekly 500 on the CERB could help those set to receive far less on EI. So the funny thing is we are not that different than the states. We're not, because this is the big fight happening right now. The stimulus package, if you've been missing it. It's the same argument. It's not a matter of if we're going to give people money. It's is it enough? The difference here, though, is obviously we've got a liberal leadership that's saying that this is the amount we're doing. And I don't know who's arguing. Obviously, people are complaining because you're getting a little bit too comfortable here. We got these even further left people arguing we need more money, more. The difference between us and the states is at least we got something to show for it. At least we have $500 ready to go in your pocket. Whereas in the states, they're going to need an executive order. And even that's probably not going to be good enough. They need their House of Representatives to really step up. So at least you're getting something. Be glad you live in Canada and not south of the border. That didn't sound south at all. All right, moving on. Last topic. And I think this is a good one. I like this perspective. This idea of mortgage rates. Will mortgage rates stay low for years to come? Dun, dun, dun. This comes from the Star. It's the lowest we've ever been. Mortgage rates drop through the floor with some as low as 1.65%. I'm going to read some of the highlights because there's a lot of good stuff in this article. So they say, traditionally, there is a heightened competition among lenders during the usual hot spring real estate season, and rates have been declining as a result. Interesting to note that if you were to buy something in the spring, you're going to get a better rate because there's more competition. There's more people looking for your money. They want to lend you money. Right now, you can get a fixed rate at 1.84%, which is unbelievable. The central bank has signaled that it doesn't plan to raise rates for at least 2 years. But here's an interesting point. But that doesn't mean that consumer rates can't rise in the meantime. Don't be mistaken, guys. Just because interest rates come down does not mean the fixed rates come down. And we've seen that if you've been kind of mapping it out for the last 6 months. But then again, if you've been mapping for the last 6 months, you probably already knew that. What it is a comfort level with the banks, which they have reached a level of comfort level which shows the strength of our local market and confidence in our local banking system and in our market. But it's also things like trying to advertise, get you the best rates possible. And right now, it's clearly a lot of competition. So clearly, good rates. They say this, bond yields in the Bank of Canada are closely correlated, but not perfectly correlated. So if you see bond yields rise, then you will see fixed rates rise. Once the lender perceives the home buying market to be slowing, they may remove some of the promotions that are in the marketplace right now. That's always a factor. How aggressive are they feeling? Oh, they got to be feeling pretty aggressive right now because the rates are quite low. Is there more room to come down? Probably. But is there a reason to if the market starts to slow down? No, not really. So this might be as good as it gets. And I love this approach that they say. They say statistically over the last 50 years, if the variable and fixed rate are 50 basis points or less apart, the fixed becomes a better idea. That means they are more likely to pay the least amount of interest for the 5-year term. And right now, the variable and fixed rates are not more than 50 basis points. In fact, they're about 20 basis points apart. So there is a very strong argument made. I love this article. There's a very strong argument made for 5-year fix, especially if you're a new investor. Yes, you can get really good rates, and if it stays low for the next couple years, your variable rate would do really well. But there is a very strong case that can be made in favor of a fixed rate mortgage right now. Another piece of statistics that they have here that I thought was great is who hopes to buy in the next 3 years. They did a poll, the Mortgage Professionals Canada. This is what they say. Respondents were asked to provide an answer on a scale of 1 to 10. The homeowners who scored 6.39 out of 10 at the end of last year have dropped to 6.11, saying that they're a little less likely now to buy in the next 3 years. But when we look at renters, listen to these numbers. A group that has suffered more from income loss during the pandemic showed a greater decline from 5.94 to 5.34. So clearly people, renters, namely people who have been more impacted by income losses during the pandemic, are less likely. So all of this to say things are getting cheaper, but that doesn't mean getting access to real estate and buying a house as a renter is getting easier. In fact, it's actually the other way around. It's actually helping people already in the game. If rates do stay low for the next year or two, odds are variable will save you money. The other loan category that the industry is watching are the existing mortgages that have been in deferral. And I love this article. It's so good. It's so good. So good. It's a slap shot. After allowing consumers or customers to pay off rent for the next 6 months crisis, lenders will be starting to look for payments this fall. Okay, let me ask you, because we just talked about this yesterday, this idea of delinquencies, and it came from Better Dwelling. So what was the result of that? Delinquencies are high, which was weird because we're thinking, you know, the number of people that are forced selling and the number of people that are declaring bankruptcy or foreclosing or their assets they're liquidating are going down. So it didn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, maybe it was just Better Dwelling after all, because listen to this. The arrears rate of Canadian mortgages is usually less than 1%. It's usually less than 1%. Of more than 2 million Ontario mortgages, only about 1,900 were in arrears at the end of March. This is the end of Q1. And that was the same stats that was used from Better Dwelling. It was Q1, which is funny because it's so long ago now, but these are all the same stats. They say that's a rate of 0.09%. So still under our 1%, right? Under our 1%. I guess, yeah, 0.09% actually, compared to 0.24% nationally. So we're outperforming here in Ontario, the national. That whole article we read yesterday was about how Toronto and Vancouver sucked and our delinquency rates were so high. But maybe it's just a perspective, and maybe their perspective is dead wrong, because when I look at stats like that, I'm like, maybe we're not doing so bad. And then compound it with this article, which just sweetens it for any of you bulls out there. Bulls being people excited about the market. Home capital sees sharp drop in mortgage deferrals as economy reopens. Listen to this, guys. Listen to this. This is a great way to end off our podcast. Home Capital Group, Inc. has seen a sharp drop in deferred payments on mortgages for clients who sought relief amid the coronavirus pandemic, an encouraging sign for banks and lenders. Here's the numbers. The alternative mortgage lenders, Home Capital, by the way, they are an alternative lender. They could be higher risk, naturally. They have deferrals have fell from 9,903 mortgages to 26, so just under 2,700. So they dropped from 9,900 deferrals to just under 2,700 deferrals. And that was from April to July. So maybe the majority of people that were on deferrals are either have resolved their issues or they didn't have issues to begin with. Very big difference from what we saw yesterday on the delinquencies. Again, I am not as concerned with deferrals. I've been very straightforward with that. Deferrals does not freak me out. What freaks me out the most is the rental eviction thing, and where I think the only thing that's going to save us from that is government money. Show me the money! Meanwhile, renters are getting clobbered, right? With affordability, doesn't matter. It's getting less likely for them to purchase. The rest of us who have real estate, we are in a good spot if we're making money, and we're in a safe spot hiding from inflation. But a lot of people will be left on the sidelines when it's all said and done. And can you imagine if the greatest hockey players decided not to play hockey? What would you have? Wayne Gretzky. I hope you guys have a fantastic day. I'm going to take the day off tomorrow. We're actually going to be going to a cottage. It's going to be fantastic. And speaking of sports, I'm going to be going and watching my youngest brother play baseball. He plays on a AAA team. We have a pretty large family. I'm the oldest of 5 more boys. I have a stepmom, so my mom isn't a slip and slide, as many of you are probably picturing in your mind right now. And if you weren't, you are now. And so I'm excited. I'm going to have a great weekend, and I'll see you guys bright and early Monday with more. Have yourself a good one. Take care and keep it real.